So I don't really know if any of this information that I'm about to supply is in any way, shape, or form new, but I recently started playing Tower of Fantasy, and all these weapons were really cool and all that, and I really enjoyed using them, but after a while, when you start progressing in levels, I started noticing that there was a very clear difference between damage I was dealing with my Molten Shield and the damage that I was dealing with my Thunderous Halberd. And at first it didn't make any sense because the amount of attack on the Thunder Halberd was much higher than that on the Molten Shield. So I was really confused and I wanted to kind of look into that. So I did a little bit of digging and I noticed that you can click on the magnifying glass underneath of the image of your character's weapon. That will show you all of the motion values attached to each particular attack of your weapon. And I noticed that the Thunder Halberds were fairly low, which I guess makes sense because it's a spear and it attacks very quickly. But it got me thinking about how damage is dealt in general, because the more I looked at the weapon and its attack value, the more I was thinking to myself, how does this small number add up to become this much bigger one? And after about an hour of collecting footage of me trying out all the different combos and stuff, I noticed this other menu you can click on, and I don't know how I've been playing this game for about 3 days without having actually noticed it. If you click on the character tab, it actually shows you the maximum value of all of your stats. So your maximum attack is categorized into the 4 elemental types. Now, despite this categorization, all of your attack values should be the same amount. The only time they'll vary is if you have pieces of equipment that specifically enhance that type of element damage. So going off that, I decided to run a little experiment. Using this number, this stat, I was going to multiply the damage values and see exactly just how much damage I was actually doing and how damage actually worked. The first thing that I noticed is that all damage is random. Even after doing all the multiplication and the adding, and then adding in the bonus damage that I was granted by the matrices that I had equipped to my weapon, I was always doing slightly more or slightly less damage than the numbers I was calculating, which leads me to believe that either A, enemies don't really have resistance, or if they do, it doesn't amount to a whole bunch, and 2, the randomization of the damage is somewhere between 5% in either direction, because the damage that I deal is never too far off from what I calculate. The other thing that I noticed is that some parts of your combo are multi-hit attacks, and the number that you see, the motion value, is actually the proposed total damage that that one multi-hit attack will deal. The actual damage is divided up. From what I'm seeing, if the multi-hit attack is 2 hits, it's divided in half. If it's divided into 4 hits, like some of the axe combo attacks, the first 3 hits are actually 1/5 of the total proposed damage, whereas the final swing is 2/5. Which means that the final hit will do roughly double the damage of the 3 initial hits. But all that said, multi-hit attacks are probably the strongest part of your combo. And this is because each and every individual hit within the singular multi-hit attack is calculated separately to some degree. They're affected by the randomizer differently, and they all have their own chance to score a critical hit. It's not a situation where either every single hit crits or none of them do. Each and every hit has its own chance to crit. I think any part of your attack that has multi-hits in it is most likely your strongest, and it's most likely the part of your combo that you want to get to the most often to deal the most damage. I'm not out here proposing the most efficient combos or anything like that. I'm just noting what I've observed, which, again, may just be old news. But a lot of these numbers that I'm showing here are just the numbers that I've calculated based on my flame attack, the motion value of the weapon, and then adding in the 6% bonus damage from the matrices, and then truncating the number. But from what I'm seeing with the patterns of the numbers, everything that I've observed so far is pretty much correct. The only thing that I've yet to discover is whether or not enemies actually have a resistance. There are places and scenarios where they will specifically tell you that enemies have a specific resistance to a certain element, but aside from that, I have yet to see any sort of resistance on the enemies themselves. But I'm still fairly early in the game, and enemies do scale in level with you. It's just your weapon level will often always outpace the enemy you're fighting. And your total attack, I can only presume, is the combined total attack of all 3 weapons you have equipped, plus all of the armor equipment that you have equipped, plus all the bonuses granted by the matrices on the separate weapons you have equipped. And then your total output damage is based on the motion values of the weapon you're currently dealing damage with. Now, I could be totally wrong about that, and it's not necessary to have 3 different weapons equipped, but I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say, based on my observations, this appears to be true. Again, I'm not expecting this to be helpful information for new players. I'm not expecting this to be relatively new information, but I am putting this out here as like a proof of concept or an observational piece, if you will, since it's fairly new and there's not a lot of information out there in official sources. I just sort of wanted to put my piece out there and say, this is what I've observed, and this is all based on my own findings, and I don't know what anyone else has found, or what any person who already has a guide out has told everyone. I just thought it would be interesting to show what I've discovered on my own as a casual, well, I guess not really a casual player, but like as a player who plays the game casually, but is fairly observant and enjoys digging around and understanding how the numbers interact. So with that all being said, I hope you found my findings interesting, or my observations interesting to say the least, and if it's nothing new, I'm sorry. But if it is new and you do find it somewhat helpful, I'm glad, because again, this isn't really meant to be helpful, but if it does help people in understanding like why their weapon seems to be a little lackluster compared to another one, this might help you understand why that is. I'm not really going to be putting out guides or anything for Tower of Fantasy, but I do find number interaction really interesting, and I thought this would be worth putting out there. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I'll see you guys in another video. So until then, stay tuned.